I'm Ashton Addison from the Crypto Coin Show, and today on Blockchain Interviews with Michael Cho and Jonathan Victor of Robotics and Bitrobot. Gentlemen, welcome to the show, and thank you for taking the time.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Excited to dive into robotics. AI and blockchain has been a common topic on blockchain interviews, but robotics, not as much. And I'm really interested to see what you two have been working on. I would love to just kick off our conversation. Michael, if you could talk about, what is Bitrobot, and then we could dive into Robots and everything about robotics and AI.
Yeah, sure. So Bitrobot, the goal with this project is really ambitious, I would say. So what we really want to do is use crypto incentives to solve embodied AI, or basically robotics AI. And the way we intend to do that is create kind of like a network of subnets, similar to Bittensor. And the idea is that each subnet within Bitrobot will create or work on specific robotic tasks that are meaningful and will move the needle for robotic research.
Yeah, that's great. Obviously Bittensor Tau has had a huge network effect and success, and I've seen sort of a DePIN networks grow more recently with the launch of some big DePIN networks, but I haven't seen a lot about robotics, and I feel like that's only the next logical step with AI is putting it into robotics. Do you think that's the main differentiator which sets you apart inside of the Web3 space, so to say?
John, you want to take that? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think one of the things that's interesting, so I think a lot of times in Web3, we're like hammers looking for nails. And so it's easy to start from, hey, look, we have this like incredible technology with blockchains, and how do we find like the right problem set to go after? I think what's interesting is like, if you start from the problem side and then like reason back into like, what are the actual things where blockchains might be useful, you might find more interesting problem sets to go after. So as an example, the thing that makes, I think, like robotics pretty different from other parts of AI is that there isn't like a giant corpus of data sets that you can just go after. Like if you were to say, like, want to build the next robotics, embodied AI model, there isn't a ton of sensor data that you can just go pull off the web. It's not like for the last 20 years, people have been spewing out all this sensor data that you could just go acquire and then run it, throw it into some giant transformer model, and then come out with a model. And so this is where it becomes kind of interesting, because we're at like this unique moment of both trying to aggregate lots of hardware in order to create robots of different modalities. We're trying to collect data across a bunch of different tasks, most of which like require now like also instrumenting, so you can capture the human input as a part of that. And then you want to like actually have that be something that you can coordinate across a giant distributed set of people. Now, like in the sort of like Web2 model, the thing that we have with like Tesla, with Figure, with some of these like large sort of like robotics labs is kind of sort of like an end-to-end like owning of that problem, where they're both sourcing all the capital to create their own hardware. They're putting that inside of their own sort of like labs or warehouses so that they can collect their own training data. And you're sort of getting like a closed loop version of creating that flywheel that we saw with Tesla and self-driving. And I think like this is where, if you were asking the question, how do you create like an open equivalent to that like industrial pipeline, you sort of come to this idea of like, hey, there's all of these distributed parties that you need to coordinate. And that can go from people who are capital owners, so people who might want to contribute robots into a giant fleet. That could be researchers that maybe don't have access to billions of dollars of hardware to go evaluate their models or run training tasks. Or even acquire the data sets or bounty out tasks that might be useful to input into future models and so on. And so I think like crypto becomes an interesting solution to this problem, because you can take the constituent things that you need in that industrial pipeline to create a final embodied AI model and say, you don't have to own that entire pipeline by yourself as a corporate lab in order to create a solution. You can actually say, you as individual participants in the supply chain can be aligned around a shared economy where you are getting commensurate like rewards for your contribution inside of that, but we can create the full end-to-end value loop that rewards everyone along the way. And I think to me, that's where like DePIN and like capital formation is like quite interesting, because robotics actually is quite capital intensive, given like we're trying to build like physical infrastructure, but also it gives you this way of saying like, how can I like focus people on specific tasks and use sort of like the subnet model specifically as like an incentive to like really focus on, I need robotic arms that will fold laundry so I can collect data on that problem, or I will do urban navigation so I can collect data on that problem, and so on. So sorry, that might have been a little too long-winded, but I think like really pointing out, I think DePIN has a really unique opportunity, both from like the capital formation side, because robotics specifically has like a lot of capital needs, but also on the coordination side. Like take all these disparate like parties that are operating in this robotics pipeline and coordinate them together.
Yeah, no, Jonathan, that's a great explanation and showing the difference between the Tesla model and how do we fit that into Web3, or in this case, more of a DePIN network, decentralized physical infrastructure network. So could you explain that a little bit more in how do contributions work if you're looking, if you're a DePIN robotics platform and you're looking to gather the hardware or the software or the input information to build this, how do you set that up and then get people to start contributing into it?
Michael, do you want to take this? Because I feel like you subnet told me.
Yeah, so maybe it's let me give some very concrete examples and maybe tie back to like what I've been doing at Robotics the last nearly 3 years now. So we started actually building this sidewalk robots, and I actually have one of them. This is our latest version. It's like a toy. It's like an RC car. You put in a 4G SIM card, and you can actually remote control it in a way from anywhere, because the whole thing it's what they call teleoperated. So you could be sitting in New York and have this robot driving around in somewhere in Africa, and so we actually structure the whole thing as a robotic game. When I say game, I literally mean like a video game. So think of it, the gaming experience is kind of like Mario Kart / Pokemon Go. So you'll be, as a gamer, you'll be looking through the camera of the cyber robot, and they will give you missions. It's a little bit like Hunger Games, where you go around and then you pick up some loot boxes and pick up Solana NFT and all that jazz, right? So except that, of course, it happens in the real world. So so to the gamers, it feels like a real game, and actually we do have gamers who actually play this, and in fact mostly Web2 gamers. They don't even know this. There's a crypto angle to all this, but really that is a means to an end. So as the gamers play the game, we actually collect data, right? Anything from the the video stream coming from the cameras, but actually more importantly from what we call the action labels. What the human gamer is doing on it, and it turns out that data set is very rare. Like what John was saying, it's like no one actually actively do something like this for the plots. Like, I would say we are probably one of the first team in the world to try to even attempt to do this. And it's a very rare data set, but it turns out to be very valuable for robotic research, where let's say and in fact the pipeline is very similar to what Tesla is trying to do, right? So Tesla will gather video from the cars, but also they gather what the human driver is doing, again action labels. And so we just started working on this for the last 2-3 years. Now we have bots in over 30 cities, Africa, South America, North America, Asia, and whatnot. And so then we started actually working, talking to some researchers, and to kind of validate the thesis that, hey, maybe this is actually useful. And I'll say fast forward to today, like that, there's a lot of validation on that front. So for example, last year we co-organized this kind of AI versus human competition with a bunch of researchers from DeepMind. We're pretty close to the guys there now, and we've got a lot of really great research labs taking part. And now we have like different research collaboration with labs from UC Berkeley, Stanford, and so like institutes like that. And so I think it's a great proof point that despite us being such a small project, and in fact despite us being crypto, because usually the researchers are very they think mostly crypto is scam, right? And despite all those, we get to work with these really world-class researchers. So I think it's a big validation that indeed this data set is onto something, and that's how we started, right? But you can think of what we did the last 2-3 years as literally just Subnet 1, and I'm talking about the game. And in fact, the competition that we actually co-organize with the DeepMind guys and Subnet 2, because if you look at Subnet 1, we are trying to incentivize human gamers and possibly people who buy this robot. By the way, this thing costs like $150. So it's a very DePIN, friendly price point, let's say. Mm-hmm. So that could be Subnet 1, right? So that's where you're trying to contribute, attract, incentivize these two groups people. And you look at Subnet 2, which actually could just be a much bigger version of that competition, AI versus human kind of competition that we had. This is where you're actually trying to incentivize researchers. And indeed, you actually also need to attract compute providers, because it turns out the data set that we actually give to the researchers, they literally need a number of H100 to even run the model. And so, but you look at Subnet 2, the output is actually an AI model, whereas Subnet 1 is a data set. So, and if you think of it this way, this can be extended way beyond cyborg robot. It could be for humanoids. It could be even for things that it's, let's say, in simulation, right? And so over there, you also need to incentivize researchers. You need to incentivize, again, GPU providers to do all that. And as John said, all these are very capital intensive, and in some cases, you need a lot of actually, manual labor to do all this thing. And so, I think crypto just have this unique advantage to do capital formation globally, very quickly. And yeah, so super excited to actually move beyond cyborg robots to all these other types of robotic tasks.
Definitely.
I think maybe I was just another little subtle point here is robotics is actually, so there's really cool demos that I think a lot of us see on Twitter every now and again, but there's a lot of large unsolved problems. So the reason that Elon talks about Optimus's hand so much is manipulation is one of the hardest problems. Mm-hmm. And so I think this is actually where Web3 is actually not that far behind Web2. And in fact, outside of things like simulation, I think there is actually a real opportunity to dramatically scale up how much human sort of labeled data can we acquire. And that's something that is literally just a human throughput problem, which crypto has shown an ability to do in parallel quite fast compared to Web2. So I think this is actually where it's not we have a real shot on goal, I think, for making Web3 the foundational platform for a lot of this stuff.
That's very exciting. And Michael, that was a great little show there of that RC car. I'm picturing from kids playing with remote control cars in their backyards to moving into controlling a rover on another planet or something. If you can control it in another continent, I think that's the next step. So that's really cool, and I love the gamified aspect of it. I feel like when Pokemon Go and Ingress, which I played before Pokemon Go, which was the basis for it, the software. That went viral. So to get the physical infrastructure in there and then add robotics in and use that to train the models, I feel like is a great way to kick off building those data sets. And John, I'm curious if you can sort of paint that picture from gathering the actions and the models from the RC car and the gamification in the first subnet. How do you take that information and use that to build a long-term vision of having robots that are in our house or on the street doing things that people see, hey, this is actually changing the world or making my life easier?
Yeah, so I want to maybe set expectations properly. The analogy I've used quite often is whenever you look at these really big types of innovation, it's sort of the integral of many S curves together. So I don't think you should expect overnight you go from A to B. What you should see is if you're looking at the final output, there's a bunch of input progress that has to happen. And the right way to look at this is how are those things improving? Because as you hit more and more of those improvements, you'll then see the macro S curve really show up, and it would look like that. And so I think specifically the thing to keep an eye out for is just how are we looking at specific tasks? So I think when you talk to researchers, and I think a lot of sort of why we spend so much time talking to researchers is to figure out what are the actually most important proximate problems that don't have a clear line of sight to their solutions, so that you can prioritize which are the tasks that you want to go collect data for. That gives you the ability then to actually figure out what are the biggest bottlenecks that Web3 can actually go after to help solve the problem faster. So urban navigation is definitely one. I think this is why we've been talking about robotics arms, and like manipulation is like another important one. But I think that's how you sort of prioritize. There's a great paper that came out. I forgot the name. Michael can definitely fill it in on cross training. And I think it's like there's evidence that shows that when you have these like embodied AI models that are trained on top of data sets that came from sort of like heterogeneous sources, the combined model is actually better than like if you were to just singularly focus on any individual task. So I think there's like also pretty good research that underpins this idea that, look, if we can collect data from all of these different sources on all of these different tasks, the combination of that will create a better model as well, which I think is like part of why we're like pretty bullish on this approach of like multiple subnets focused on different tasks that are really like trying to prioritize what are the biggest gaps inside of like the robotics landscape.
Definitely. And you're right, it's not something that can happen overnight. But I feel like the pace at which AI is improving is faster than people thought. You know, seeing the different versions of just the LLMs coming out each year, it's getting like 10 times or more better each version. How quickly do you think that the robotics side will grow, in a sense that real world people will see how much functionality has been improved in a short amount of time?
Yeah, so maybe I'll take this one. So yeah, I think that's a very good question. So because that's this word AI in embodied AI, so people start to come with this expectation that, you know, the velocity or the iteration cycle is going to be as quick as, you know, things like or the latest LLM, right? But if you think of all this AI development in the digital realm or the cognitive realm, so really the only three things that matters is you need data, right? And you need compute, and you need talent, right? Mostly researchers that can push the boundary of the latest algorithm, right? And you basically need only these three core ingredients. And so, for example, when let's say DeepSeek or like OpenAI drop another model, what you realize is that, you know, typically within half a day or 1 day, right, in AI Twitter, you know, land, pretty much everyone will have a pretty good idea how good or how bad is that particular model, right? Even though there are a bunch of different benchmarks, but in general, you can arrive at a pretty good idea how good or how bad is that model, meaning the last step of evaluation or benchmarking is never a bottleneck, right? So now, if you think about embodied AI, it's very different. So let's say when Tesla rolled out their latest like FSD, they have no idea, okay, or let's say within 1 day, okay, and let's say they've already collected 1 million miles, and there's no crashes or no disengagement in the 1 million miles. So the question is, have they actually like reached level 5, or are they still a level 2 thing? Because what if in the next mile there's a crash? And so if you think about it like that, right, actually in robotics and the evaluation step could actually be a way better bottleneck even compared to the lack of data, right? We kept talking about the lack of data just now, and that's a serious bottleneck. But if you think about that, actually evaluation might be an even bigger bottleneck, because you can't tell how good or how bad is your model in simulation. You actually need to do it in the physical world where the robots are meant to do the physical things. And so, so I think because of this particular like evaluation step, I think a lot of people are going to be rather disappointed that it's going to take a lot longer, you know, than expected. But you know, I think if you take that stance, then actually perhaps robotics AI or embodied AI might be the final, you know, frontier left after we've gone past like all the cognitive tasks that most humans can do. It could be the final piece in the path to AGI. And so, yeah, I think all this just to me just means that like in the coming years, there's just going to be more attention and more like funding looking into like solving this robotics issue. And again, you need a lot of capital. You need lots of physical robots to actually test these things out in the real world.
Which actually maybe to like add on to my point, I think this is actually like a really important like piece of nuance. So when you actually think, so let's take cars as an example. Like you can have a car that's useful without self-driving. And so you can distribute the capital base to customers to like pay $50,000 for a Tesla or whatever. And like Tesla can run and do all of like their data gathering, evaluation, like in shadow mode on the car, like after the fact. And they've basically gotten like lots of capital support to basically build a self-driving network. The same is not true for robotics. And like, that's why like for a lot of the robotics, like you need to like start with something where if the robot is going to cost $15,000 to $50,000 to $100,000, it's a much more niche set of things if it doesn't actually perform a task already. And so that's why I think you see a lot of like the early sort of like bootstrapping of this being like Tesla, like people doing things inside of their own sort of like warehouses where they can control sort of the environment. They can build it up to like some sort of utility locally for themselves. And like Michael has made this argument to me before about how like sort of B2B is probably the first place you'll see this, where like for very specific tasks, you will see robots that are like hyper trained to do those things. But on the evaluation point, I think this is actually where like the argument I was making about those S curves is really important, because like evaluation is sort of like the last part of that. And this is where DePIN could change where, like how fast does robotics come? Because if we can get a giant distributed base of robots that are available for evaluation, you've now increased everyone's cycle time in order to evaluate their models. So like that final sort of like thing can move up. But yeah, so I think like that's one area where like we can make a prediction about this, but a lot of it is sort of path dependent. If there are 100 or like 1 million robots that are available for parallel evaluation, you have like 1,000,000x the ability for people to do their evaluation step, which actually makes it much faster to like do the iterations to like get to the next level.
Yeah, and maybe just to circle back, like what we were discussing, using gaming as the sugar wedge, right? And I think it makes a lot of sense, at least to me, because I think that I take the view that actually for a robot, let's say a humanoid to actually take over a chef at a restaurant, in my view, is at least a decade away, right? And so in the meantime, what do these robots do if it's just gonna have like, because it's I think for most use cases it's not gonna be good enough if the robot can do that task 99% success rate. What you actually need is probably Six Sigma, right? 99.9999%, right? And we've seen this in self-driving. I remember I got a chance to sit in a Google self-driving car back in 2015. This is 10 years ago. And I thought, wow, okay, this is coming. And of course, now we're here. We're still talking about, in going to production. So these things might take a long time. And so I think in the meantime, actually gaming is a very, I don't know whether you can call it a use case, but, it certainly have a lot of entertainment value. And oftentimes, if you look at gaming, it has been that genesis of pushing the new wave of technology, forward. It could be, in fact, the fact that we have GPU today doing AI is because we have GPU running for games for decades, right? For NVIDIA to build to this point, or VR and all that. So so I think gaming is going to be, I myself, I've driven our robots, in the real world. I just find it very fun, and so it is useful in that way to me already. And that could be the wedge that we need actually to tie things over while we collect data in the real world.
Definitely. Yeah, I think that personal robotics it's so specific in the tasks that a robot needs to complete that I think people are underestimating just how precise it needs to be. It's not just like a robotic arm that just does one thing. It really needs to do everything that humans can do with such precision that there's still a long way to go. So I'll check back in 10 years with you and see where we're at. Now, with the contributing into this robotics movement and the DePIN network specifically, is the main way to do it right now just getting the RC car and playing the game, or are there other ways of just contributing your GPU power or finding other ways to input software or information into the AI model?
So I'll take this one first. So obviously we just announced the concept of Bitrobot and the white paper. It's going to be published in a couple of weeks' time. And so I think in the coming months we will have more concrete proposal, or like setting up the actual network and going into the testnet and all that. By the way, this Bitrobot will be built on Solana. So I think officially, like in a couple of months' time, you'll see concrete like ways for people to participate. Having said that, I think in the coming weeks, in fact, we have actually a number of really interesting, in my view, partnership with actually other DePIN projects, where these are, I would say, all these partnerships are early showcase of what future subnets could be. And so this would be where it's kind of similar to the things that we've been illustrating just now. This could be certain projects that have a lot of compute GPU. This could be projects where or like existing project like ourselves, with the sidewalk robots. And it could be projects that actually have a lot of, let's say, a community of gamers, right? So those guilds, in fact, we are close partner with YGG, YouGuild Games. So there'll be projects, partnerships like this where we'll continue to showcase not just a sidewalk robot, like I said, in the coming weeks or months. And so, I think a lot of this will be a lot more concrete in everyone's eyes, and once all these partnerships start showing up. And of course, not forgetting that we have pretty good relationship with a bunch of research labs, and a lot of these partnerships will also involve those labs. Because honestly, without these researchers, even if you provide a compute, like who's going to run the GPU, right? So we really need those talent to be involved as well.
Definitely. Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing the paper. And I know it's early on, and growing the AI models is one thing, but actually putting it into physical robotics is the next level, it's a lot of work. And I'm glad that you guys have these partnerships with these research labs, but because without that, it would be even tougher. Maybe you can give a quick 30 seconds on the rationale or the reasons of why the Solana chain is good for a DePIN network and for building out this robotics platform.
Yeah, so I would say, so when we've started like 3 years ago, honestly, I was very anti-crypto. But what happened was I discovered, like, I think me and my brother, who's my co-founder, we discovered Helium like 2 months into the project. So at the time before discovering Helium, we were just thinking of, creating a sidewalk robot that's pretty cheap. So that was our thesis. And then, but 2 months later, we discovered Helium, and I was just mind blown, right? Because, they didn't have this term called DePIN back then, but I already saw that, hey, they minted a token out of thin air, and they were able to basically crowdsource so much capital. And what is even more impressive is that they've done it so like on a geographically distributed manner. And so shortly after that, I was like, okay, I need to learn how to do this. And then literally 1 week after that, there was a Solana hackathon in Singapore. And so we didn't know what we were doing. I didn't know what is a smart contract, what is an L1, but like, and but this is like nearly 3 years ago. And so for us in Robotics, we've been actually, even though we don't have a token, but we've been messing around with a lot of Solana NFT and all that. So we've been very comfortable actually building on it. I would say what we do, 99% of it doesn't the success is depending on how good is our hardware, how good is our networking stack and things like that. But for us as a builder, I think Solana has been a decent place to build on, and of course, it has survived, many setbacks. And nowadays, you have very, very big DePIN projects. For example, Helium ported to Solana. So I think that gives us a lot of confidence that this is a decent L1 chain to build on. And of course, with the recent round of funding, we were really lucky and fortunate to have backings from Solana Ventures and angel checks from Anatoly and Raj. And so we are definitely, I guess, Solana bulls. Yep.
Yeah, that's great. No, that's wonderful to hear. I'm looking forward to it. And so now with a future sort of tentative roadmap, which of course everything can move around depending on how quickly or the quality of the AI information that's gathered. But you mentioned there's a white paper coming out shortly, and then there's also the Solana NFTs that you mentioned I'm interested in. Is that something that, when can people start accumulating that, and then what else can they do in the near future as the iterations keep growing?
Yeah, so I would say the NFTs, these are not like the 10,000 limited version kind of NFT. These are literally just like in-game assets. So like, you shouldn't think about it. It's just we use NFT like for the utility purpose, not like But we actually have this other thing called SAM. So SAM is actually an embodied AI agent with its own meme coin. And if you go to the Twitter handle, it's called Sam is moving. and it's basically live streaming 24/7. So anytime you look into it, you see an AI that's driving one of our robots, in a random city, and literally the whole thing is 100%, right? AI, autonomous driven, and so yeah, and Sam is actually built on virtuals. So. And in fact, we have some pretty big announcements. I should also mention that Virtuals invested in our this current round as well. So we're very close to them. And so I'll say for people who are interested to accumulate something, but not financial advice. I should also mention this is just a meme coin, right? No pretense of utility. But I think for me, because I came from 3 years ago completely thinking that crypto is all a scam, right? And so it took me a while to understand what meme coins represent, and I've come to realize that actually, of course, on one hand, I'll say our North Side is definitely what we're, building with Jonathan and the Protocol Labs guys, like very deep in, heavy capital formation. So that's one extreme of crypto. If done well, it can really move the needle, and that's truly our North Star. But the other extreme of crypto, which is all the degen or the meme coin, right? You have really fickle-minded, like let's say, people, a community. But then again, I think it's also a great place to actually very quickly garner attention, maybe at capital as well. So I would say, in very, very soon we will have some announcement on that front as well. But yeah, do check out Sam. It's a pair on virtuals. So
very cool. Yeah, I'll add Sam's X handle in the show notes as well. I'll check that out on Virtuals, and great to see they're partnering with you guys. Jonathan, do you have any last words on the plan moving forward and how else people can get involved before we wrap up?
Yeah, I think for right now, maybe the thought would be try to follow on the different social channels. So maybe we can give you like the Bitrobot Twitter handle and things like that so people can stay up to date. I think in the coming weeks to months, obviously whitepaper, I think as Michael mentioned, a number of partnerships with other DePIN projects. And then once the network launches, we have pretty ambitious targets for how many subnets we hope to spin up. So I think once those start getting announced, there will be a bunch of different ways for people to participate and help contribute whatever sort of resources they have, whether that be their own time or buying robots and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Very cool. I'm looking forward to it. Can't wait to see the robots driving down my side street here. Whether it's me driving it or somebody else in Singapore or another continent, which is even cooler. I really appreciate your guys' insight into where we are at with robotics and AI. I have a feeling like more and more people are going to become interested in it from the blockchain realm and AI realm as we get more physical here. And it looks like you guys are really spearheading something cool. And I love the gaming aspect at the beginning. I think it's a great play. Looking forward to the launch. I'll leave all those links you mentioned in the show notes, and would love to have you guys back on after the white paper is launched and the subnets are going live to see how else people can contribute, and so I can learn more about the best way to get involved and participate. And I really do thank both of you guys for your insights and your time today.
Yeah, thank you, Ashton.
Yeah, thanks for having us.